My name is Clara Vance. I am 29 years old. For 5 years, a wealthy family paid me to be their son's devoted wife. I gave him 30 gifts. He never opened a single one. When he signed our divorce papers, without once looking up from his phone, they thought I had nothing. 1 year later, my painting hung in the Museum of Modern Art. This is my story. The coffee grinder ran for 40 seconds. Clara counted, the way she always did, a habit from year 1, when the sound of it had been her first signal that the day was real. 6 in the morning, the kitchen still dark, the tile floor cold under her bare feet. Outside the window above the sink, the night-blooming jasmine had opened along the garden wall, white flowers catching the streetlight, giving off the faint sweet smell that had no business being this precise, this clean, at the end of 5 years. She made the coffee. She soft-boiled the eggs. She trimmed the crusts from the toast the way he preferred and squeezed the orange juice by hand. Her left hand, still marked at the wrist by a faint pale ridge of scar tissue from a burn that had never fully faded, moved through the routine the way a musician's hands move through a piece they have played so many times. The body no longer requires the mind. She set the table for one. She placed the plate, the glass, the folded napkin, the small pot of coffee. Then she reached into her jacket pocket and set her house key beside the glass. She stood back and looked at the table for a moment. The jasmine outside had a smell that belonged to another kind of morning, a hopeful one. She was aware of the irony. She let it sit there. She picked up her bag from the hallway floor. She put on her jacket. She walked to the front door. The slippers were at the door, where she had placed them the night before. His slippers, dark gray, turned to face outward so they would be easy to step into when he came downstairs. She had done this every morning for 5 years, without being asked, without it ever being acknowledged. She looked at them for a moment, then she left them there and walked out. The flight to Florence was at 10:45. She had a travel folder in her jacket pocket, given to her by a woman she no longer owed anything to. She had a sketchbook under her arm, 3 new brushes wrapped in cloth, and the name of an apartment near the Arno River. She had nothing else. It was enough. 6 years earlier, Clara Vance stood at the front door of the Hargrove estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, holding a handwritten thank you note and trying not to look at the gate. The gate was iron. It was taller than she was. It told her, without any ambiguity, that she was standing at the boundary between 2 entirely different kinds of life. She rang the bell anyway. The Hargrove Foundation had funded her scholarship 3 years before. She was one of 22 students they supported that year. She was the only one who had ever come back in person to say thank you. She had spent a week writing the note, not because the words were hard, because the feeling was. Gratitude, when it is real, is a difficult thing to contain on a single page. A butler answered and looked at her with the particular expression of a man who is professionally polite and personally certain the visitor has made an error. Clara introduced herself. The butler said he would check. She did not expect to be let in. She was let in. Catherine Hargrove received her in the sitting room on the 2nd floor. The room smelled of old wood, cut flowers, and the specific quiet that belongs to spaces where important decisions have been made for a very long time. A grandfather clock counted seconds in the corner. The chair she offered had legs that were slightly too short, so that Clara sat lower than Catherine did. She noticed this. She did not mention it. Catherine was silver-haired, composed, and utterly precise. She looked at Clara the way someone looks at an unexpected detail that might be useful, with attention, and then calculation, in that order. Most of our scholarship recipients never even send a card, she said. My foster mother taught me better than that, Clara said. That was the sentence, she would later think. That one sentence. That was the thing Catherine needed to hear to know what she was working with. Catherine set down her teacup. She looked toward the window for a long moment. Then she told her about Nathan. Clara heard the whole of it. Nathan and Iris Whitfield, childhood sweethearts from the same Greenwich world, the same country clubs, the same private schools, Iris moving abroad without a phone call. The marriage announcement on social media, a photograph, her and her new husband, kissing under the northern lights, radiant. Nathan at the airport that same night, driving too fast, the car accident, the hospital. 2 years of drinking that followed. A sharp-minded man carefully taking himself apart in a house 3 miles from where his mother watched, and could not reach him. He needs someone patient enough to reach him, Catherine said. Someone he might actually let close. Clara was quiet for a moment. I have a fellowship, she said. Fine Arts, Florence. I leave in 3 weeks. I know. The Hargrove Foundation funded the program. Your slot is reserved. She folded her hands on the arm of the chair. Give me 5 years. Help Nathan heal. Help him move past Iris. When the contract ends, I send you to Florence myself, full stipend, every door open. She sat with that for a moment. 5 years, she said, and then I'm free. 5 years, Catherine agreed, and then you're free. What Clara did not know, what Catherine did not tell her, was in paragraph 7 of the 3-page handwritten agreement she asked her to sign that evening. The clause was brief. It said, if the objective remains unmet at the contract's conclusion, the original scholarship debt reattaches in full, with accumulated interest. She did not have a lawyer. She was 23 years old and had grown up in a foster home and still believed, with the bone-deep certainty of a person who had survived on trust, that people who extended kindness were fundamentally good. She signed in the careful, deliberate hand of a woman who had never once broken her word. She would not learn about paragraph 7 until year 4. She would not learn that Catherine had quietly closed her Florence slot at the end of year 2, written to the program on Hargrove Foundation letterhead to say she was withdrawing permanently, until she called to confirm the reservation and heard the confusion in the woman's voice. That phone call lasted 4 minutes. She thanked her and hung up. She stood in the kitchen of the villa and looked out at the jasmine in the garden. Her ink-stained left hand was flat against the counter. She could feel the cold of the marble against her palm. She had been told the door was waiting for her. She had been given a leash and told it was a road. She thought about this for a long time. Then she washed her hands, dried them, and went to make dinner. The courtship was performed. The loneliness inside it was real. She met Nathan at a charity gala in December, 11 days after signing the contract, a staged encounter that Catherine had choreographed down to the table assignment. She played the role as written, a woman struck at first sight, returning across the room, patient through 3 brush-offs, persistent in the way that either becomes tedious or becomes something else, depending on the man. With Nathan, it became something else. Not because he warmed to her, he didn't, not fully, not for a long time, but because he noticed that she kept coming back. He was used to women who performed devotion and then retreated when he didn't respond. Clara didn't retreat. She learned his preferences. She learned his silences. She learned the way he held his coffee cup, both hands close to the chest, when he was thinking about something he wasn't going to say. 6 months in, he stopped brushing her off. 8 months in, they were something that could be called, if you squinted at it, a couple. She was an artist. She had spent her life learning to see the thing beneath the surface of things, the light inside the shadow, the truth inside the composition. She saw both in him, the composed face he showed the world, and underneath it, the grief he had been carrying since he was 22. She did not tell him that she saw it. She simply continued showing up. The yacht party was in Newport, October. Cold salt smell on the air. The water below the stern was loud in the way harbor water is at night, a constant, indifferent slap against the hull, the sound of something that doesn't care what you decide to do. The kind of dark that belongs to ocean water at night, total without reference. A bet was made between 8 guests. Whoever's partner jumped into the harbor and retrieved a ring that had been thrown from the stern would win a piece of North Heights real estate that Nathan had been trying to acquire for 2 years. Clara had heard him mention the land 11 times. She had been counting. 6 of the others stepped back from the railing when they saw the size of the waves. The water was black and cold, and the distance from the boat to the ring's last visible point was 30, maybe 40 feet. Clara handed Nathan her jacket and went over the rail. The cold hit her like a flat surface. She found the ring by feel, not sight. She came up on the 3rd attempt, arm raised, ring between her fingers. When they pulled her back over the railing, Nathan was there. He was shaking. He had not shaken for anyone since the airport, 4 years before. Clara. His voice was different. The armor had slipped, just for a moment, but it had slipped. Let's get married. I'll try to love you. 3 words that were honest. 3 words that told her exactly what this was and was not. She said yes anyway. She found out 4 days later that Iris Whitfield had posted a photograph that same night. Her and her husband, standing under the northern lights in Iceland, kissing. The caption said something about happiness. The photograph had 43,000 likes by morning. Nathan had proposed to fill a hole that had just been ripped open again. She knew this. She had known it in the moment he said it, in the slight delay before "I'll try," in the way his eyes hadn't quite found her face. She said yes anyway, because the contract required it, and because some stubborn part of her, the part that had survived a foster home on pure stubbornness, believed that 5 years of genuine devotion might build something. That love could be constructed, slowly, by patient hands. She would spend a long time learning how wrong that was. The marriage, from the outside, looked like what every man deserved. She rose at 6. She ground the coffee beans by hand, 40 seconds, always, and had breakfast ready before he came downstairs. She kept his bath at 98 degrees. She placed his slippers at the door each evening, turned outward. She managed the household staff, remembered the names of his colleagues' children, and never once embarrassed him in public. If he mentioned in passing, at dinner on a Tuesday, that he had liked a particular pasta sauce as a child, she had learned to make it from scratch by Friday. He accepted this the way you accept good weather, without examining it, without gratitude, as simply a condition of being alive. She had learned to see the house the way she saw a canvas, not what was there, but what was absent. The corner by the window that needed something green, the hallway that needed light from the left, the study that had space for one good chair and a reading lamp and never had either. She fixed what she could without being asked. She left the rest. The gifts were the things she returned to in her quieter moments. She had given him 30 gifts in 5 years, birthdays, anniversaries, every Christmas morning. She chose each one the way an artist chooses a subject, with attention, with care, with the belief that the right object, in the right hands, could say what words could not. An Atlas of the Connecticut Coastline, first edition, 1947, a small watercolor of a harbor he had mentioned loving as a boy, which she had painted herself. A first edition novel he had quoted once, in passing, at a dinner party 18 months into the marriage. A wooden box, hand-carved, for his reading glasses, because he always set them down in the wrong place and spent the first 10 minutes of every morning looking for them. She wrapped each one in brown paper, tied with a card she wrote herself. He never opened a single one. She found them one afternoon in the corner of the study, all 30, still wrapped, still ribboned, covered in a thin layer of dust. She sat on the floor in front of them and ran her thumb along the edge of the closest one. The paper crinkled under her touch. The card was still sealed. She didn't feel angry. She felt something quieter, like finishing the last page of a book and realizing, very slowly, that the story had never been about you. There was only Iris. In every photograph on his desk, in every last-minute flight abroad, in the anonymous gifts he mailed to Iceland, and then London, and then wherever Iris's marriage went to fail, gifts his assistant ordered, wrapped, and shipped, that everyone in the Greenwich social world knew came from Nathan Hargrove, because that was how he always loved her, from the blind side, relentlessly. In the 3 days he lay unconscious in a hospital bed after the car accident, he had been driving to the airport, too fast, trying to be the first person Iris saw when she landed in New York for a work trip. The ward was quiet the way hospitals are quiet at 3 in the morning, not peaceful, but suspended, the hum of equipment, the occasional soft footfall of someone doing a job that never stops. Outside the window, the parking lot lights burned orange and motionless all night long. Clara sat beside his bed for all 3 days. She did not sleep. She took a small notebook from her jacket pocket, and she made a mark every time he said Iris's name in his sleep. She needed the number, needed something specific and cold to hold, like a stone, so she could stop hoping. 999 times in 72 hours. She closed the notebook. She stopped hoping. She thought about Martha back at St. Agnes, who had watched her win the fellowship and watched her give it up without a word of reproach, who had simply said, "You'll know when it's time." She had not called her since year 1. She would call her when there was something worth saying. In year 4, on a Thursday afternoon in March, she called the fine arts program in Florence to confirm her reserved spot. The woman on the phone was polite and confused. "I'm sorry, Ms. Vance, there's no deferred enrollment on file for you. The spot was released approximately 2 years ago. We received written notice of permanent withdrawal from the Hargrove Foundation." She held the phone away from her ear. Outside the kitchen window, the jasmine was beginning to bud. "I didn't withdraw," she said. "I was told my place was being held." "I understand. The letter came on Hargrove Foundation letterhead. I can send you a copy if you'd like." "No," she said, "thank you." She hung up. She stood at the counter until the coffee went cold in the pot. Her hand was flat against the marble. She could feel the cold of it moving up through her palm, into her wrist, up her forearm. 2 years ago, Catherine had closed the door 2 years in, when the contract had enough weight that leaving it felt impossible. She had said nothing. She had kept saying nothing every time she reminded her that Florence was waiting. She thought about paragraph 7. She read it again that evening, alone in the study. The math was simple. She had been given a debt, a cage, and a story about a door. She had paid the debt. She was still in the cage. The door had never existed. She made a decision that night. She would finish the 5 years. She would honor her word, because her word was the only thing in this house that actually belonged to her, and when it ended, she would find Florence herself. Nobody would give it to her. She would build the door herself. Nathan found the contract on a Tuesday afternoon in October of the 3rd year, in a manila folder in the second drawer of his mother's study desk. He had gone to the estate to pick up some documents. Catherine was out. The study was unlocked. He was looking for a pen. The folder had his name on the tab. He read it once, quickly, standing at the desk. Then he sat down in his mother's chair and read it again, slowly, every line, including paragraph 7. He sat in that chair for 22 minutes. The grandfather clock counted every one of them. When he stood up, his face was composed. He put the folder back exactly as he had found it. He closed the drawer. He walked out of the study, down the hallway, out the front door, and drove home. That night, Clara made dinner. She set the table the way she always did, poured the wine, asked how his day was. "Fine," he said. He did not tell her what he knew. He did not ask her to explain. He took the information and filed it in the coldest part of himself, and in the days that followed, he began to use it. The change was not immediate. It was gradual, the way a temperature drops, not noticeably, moment to moment, until you realize you have been cold for a very long time. The punishments, which had always been careless, cold meals returned, small humiliations delivered without apparent design, became purposeful. He watched her face when he spoke to her. He calibrated. He was a CEO. He understood leverage. He had just discovered that he had more than he thought. One evening, about a week after he found the folder, she made a small suggestion about the household. A landscaping company that needed replacing, a better price from a different vendor. A practical thing. The kind of thing she managed quietly, without acknowledgement, as she had for 3 years. He looked up from his phone with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Flat, quiet, the expression of someone who has decided something. "You work for this household," he said. His voice was even. He could have been reading from a page. "Remember that." She went still. He went back to his phone. She stood in the kitchen long enough for the stove light to cycle off on its own. Her left hand was on the counter. The ink stain on her index finger had been there, so long she no longer noticed it except in moments like this one, when the body needed something to look at. She did not know what had changed, she only knew that something had. Absence, she understood. Absence was the thing she had learned to navigate, but this was different. This was deliberate. The weight of it was different from indifference. It was permission. He had found something that made him feel he had permission. She had spent 6 months planning the night of the meteor shower. She had found out, almost by accident, in a conversation about childhood he had half participated in at a dinner party, that he had never seen one. His parents had always been busy. It was a small thing, a gap in an otherwise gilded life, but she had learned that small gaps are where loneliness lives, and she was, at heart, an artist, someone who spent her life paying attention to the things other people did not stop for. She researched the Perseids for 6 months. She drove to a lookout in Vermont twice in the spring, once in June and once in July, to check the sight lines and the light pollution and the angle of the northeastern sky in August. She noted the summit temperature, 51 degrees on a clear night in July, and she bought a thermos that held heat for 8 hours and a second wool blanket, the thick kind that stays warm when the dew comes in. She bought 2 of everything, 2 folding chairs, 2 mugs, 2 thermoses. She told him in the first week of August she had something she wanted to show him, 2 hours north, just the 2 of them, Saturday night. He said. She reminded him Tuesday, she reminded him Friday, Saturday morning she loaded the car. At 3 in the afternoon her phone buzzed. His text said, "Something came up, next time." She sat in the kitchen and read the text 3 times. She already knew what the something was. Iris's marriage had been showing cracks for 2 months. He had flown to London twice in June. She drove to Vermont alone. The mountain air at the lookout smelled of cold earth and pine sap, and the particular damp of October at elevation, clean and exact and entirely without comfort. She set up both chairs at the lookout. She poured coffee into her thermos. She laid the second blanket across the empty seat, not folded in the bag, but spread across it, as if it were still possible that someone would arrive and need it. The Perseids came. Long white arcs at first, one every few minutes, then a cascade, a dozen in 90 seconds, blazing silently across the black. The mountains were absolutely still. The temperature dropped to 47 degrees. She could see her breath. She sat there until 4:43 in the morning, when the sky began to thin toward gray. She did not tell him when she came home. She never mentioned the 6 months, the 2 scouting trips, the second chair, the blanket. She packed both thermoses, the one she had used and the one that had never been opened, and drove back to Greenwich, and made him breakfast when he walked in the door that afternoon. She poured the untouched coffee down the sink. She washed the thermos and put it back in the cabinet. She never bought another. The restaurant was called Harborside. It smelled of warm sesame oil and good wine, and the particular well-heated comfort of a room that costs something to enter. White tablecloths, a wine list that required a separate booklet, lighting calibrated to make everyone in it look like they were doing well. They were 8 at the table, a work dinner, one of the evenings Nathan used to maintain his professional relationships, colleagues, investors, 2 people from an architecture firm. She had been back in the States for 3 weeks, staying at the Four Seasons while her house was renovated, and her presence at these gatherings had become, in those 3 weeks, quietly ordinary. No one introduced her as anything. She was simply there. Clara sat 3 seats to Nathan's left and ate her dinner and spoke, when spoken to, and watched the table the way she had learned to watch tables. Not as a participant, but as a painter, recording light, recording posture, recording the particular way Iris leaned slightly toward Nathan every time he spoke, the way a plant leans toward a window. The hot pot came in the second course. The server set it in the center of the table. Someone reached across. The pot tipped. Scalding oil across the table. Clara's left hand, the painting hand, the hand with the old scar, took the worst of it. She heard the sound it made when it hit, a sound that was not a sound so much as a sudden, complete erasure of everything else. Blisters formed within seconds. She could not speak. The pain was the kind that removes thought entirely and replaces it with a single, flat, white note. A few drops had landed on Iris' wrist. Nathan looked between them. Clara watched his face. She had been watching his face for 3 years by then. She knew every register of it. This one was not instinct, not panic, not the reflex of a frightened man. He had known about the contract for 2 years. He had been living with the knowledge, making use of it, every day for 2 years. This was a choice. Iris's face crumpled. Her eyes filled. "My skin," she said softly. "I've always been sensitive. Even small things feel." She pressed her hand to her chest and did not finish the sentence. Nathan stood up. He put his arm around her. He turned toward the door. Then he paused and looked back at Clara, who was sitting with a cloth napkin pressed against her hand, breathing through the pain in careful, measured intervals. "Iris is delicate," he said. His voice was even. The table had gone quiet. "You know how she is. The hospital is 10 minutes. Just call an Uber and meet us there." The door closed behind them. The table was silent. A young waiter, he could not have been more than 20, a college student, his shirt pressed by someone who cared about him, came to where Clara was sitting and helped wrap the hand with a clean cloth from the service station. He found a painkiller from the first aid kit under the bar. He helped Clara to the door and held it open. "Do you want me to call someone?" the young man asked. Clara looked at him. He had a kind face, the kind that had not yet learned to look away. "No," Clara said. "Thank you. You are the kindest person I've spoken to in a long time." The young man didn't know what to say to that. He held the door a moment longer, then let it close. At the hospital, in the exam room, while a nurse worked on the blisters with careful, gloved hands, Clara heard 2 voices from the hallway outside. 2 women, passing with a cart, One said something she didn't catch. The other replied, and she heard it clearly. He rented the whole floor for her. Can you believe that? A few drops of oil and she gets a private suite. If someone loved me like that. They laughed. Their voices moved away down the corridor and did not come back. Clara closed her eyes. She had been married to Nathan Hargrove for nearly 5 years. Iris Whitfield had been back in the country for 22 days. A stranger with a few oil drops got the whole floor. She got an Uber and a folding chair. She did not feel rage. What she felt was something quieter and more final, the click of a door closing on a room she had spent 5 years trying to furnish, not with a bang, with a soft, precise, mechanical click, the sound of something finished. When the nurse was done, she thanked her and walked out into the September night and called a car home. The morning of the last day, she made breakfast for the final time. She placed the divorce papers beside his glass. She had been carrying them in her jacket since the day she had them prepared, 3 weeks after the hospital, the same week she accepted that the door had always been locked, and she was the only one who hadn't known it. He came downstairs at 7:23. He sat, he looked at his phone. She poured the coffee. The kitchen was quiet except for the tick of the wall clock and, from his side of the table, the small soft tap of his thumb against the screen, whatever Iris had sent arriving impulses, each one bright and brief. She had decided, sometime in the weeks since the hospital, that she was not going to make this difficult, not for his sake, for her own. She was finished carrying things that did not belong to her, and the impulse to make a scene, to demand acknowledgement, to be seen, that impulse belonged to a version of herself that had spent 5 years hoping. That version was done. Nathan, she said. Her voice was as level as she could make it. Let's get a divorce. He didn't look up. She turned the papers to the last page. She placed the pen on the signature line. Sign here. Okay. He signed, still looking at his phone. Whatever Iris had sent him that morning had made him smile, a genuine, unguarded smile that she had quietly tried to earn for 1,825 days. It appeared for someone else. In the space of a second. She watched it. Then she picked up the signed papers, folded them, and put them in her jacket. Nathan. She kept her voice even. Do you know what you just signed? He looked up, genuine uncertainty on his face. The donation form for the orphanage. You mentioned it last week. She had gotten him to sign the St. Agnes Foster Home donation form 4 weeks ago. He had remembered it just long enough to misidentify the document that had ended their marriage. Something moved through her, not bitterness, not the satisfaction of a small, mean victory. It was something cleaner than that, the sensation of a clock that has been counting down for 5 years reaching 0. Not with a bang, not even with a click, just with a quiet, mechanical stop. Never mind, she said, go be happy. He nodded and looked back at his phone. A week later, Nathan's assistant delivered a velvet box. The note said it was for the trouble at dinner. There was no name, the handwriting was the assistant's. The ring inside was an emerald pinky ring from Sotheby's, limited edition, autumn auction, the most expensive item his assistant had found on a 20-minute search. The first gift Nathan Hargrove had ever given Clara Vance, in 5 years of marriage. She held the box in both hands for a moment. She thought about 30 wrapped gifts covered in dust. She thought about a second thermos, washed and put back in the cabinet, never opened. Then the front door opened and Lydia walked in with Iris, still in her tennis whites, car keys swinging from one finger, the way she always arrived everywhere, as if she had just come from somewhere more important. Lydia's eyes went straight to the ring. Her face lit up. Oh my God, she breathed. Iris was literally just talking about that ring on the way over. The limited Sotheby's emerald. I can't believe he remembered. Didn't I tell you he never forgets? She turned to Iris, delighted. Iris's face went pink. Her eyes went to the ring, then to Clara, then carefully to the floor. Clara looked at Nathan. She watched it happen in real time, the color rising in his face. The assistant had been told to buy the most expensive available item. The most expensive available item happened to be the one Iris had admired in an auction catalog 3 weeks ago. It had ended up in his wife's hands because no one in this house had been paying attention to the difference. 1 second passed. Clara picked up the box and held it across the table to Iris. "It was meant for you," she said. "You should have it." 6 words, delivered flat and final, without heat, without drama, the way you state a simple fact about the weather. Nobody moved. For the first time in the 2 years since he had found the folder in his mother's study, since the day he had looked at her and decided she was staff, Nathan looked at Clara the way you look at someone when you realize they are no longer where you left them. She was right. She wasn't. The night of the Hargrove Foundation's autumn gala, Clara arrived in a gown Nathan had sent over through his assistant. He had apparently not considered, or had not noticed, that the 30-day cooling-off period had ended 2 days prior, and they were legally divorced. He still expected her to appear as his devoted wife. She almost didn't go. But Catherine had her travel documents. She had assembled them herself, the Florence program paperwork, the stipend details, an apartment lease near the Arno that she had arranged on her own initiative, as if the gesture could carry the weight of what she had set in motion 5 years ago. She owed her a goodbye at least. The Hargrove estate was lit for the occasion. Chandeliers blazing, white flowers banked against every wall, a live piano carrying through the main hall, a Scott Joplin piece, slow and careful, that she recognized from somewhere she could not immediately place. The rooms were full. She found a quiet position near a window that looked out onto the garden and stood there with a glass of sparkling water. Across the room, Iris stood at the center of a group of old-school friends. Clara could hear fragments of the conversation. Someone said his name. Someone said he had flown to see her 17 times over 5 years. Someone mentioned the anonymous gifts everyone had always known, they said, and the knowing was affectionate, admiring, the way people speak about love that is single-minded and complete. Someone said, "You have to respect that kind of devotion." Clara looked out the window. She thought about the lookout in Vermont, the 2 chairs, the second blanket, the sky full of Perseids and no one beside her to see it. She thought, admirable, yes. Not one person in this room has noticed the woman he came home to. Catherine appeared at her elbow. She pressed a travel folder into her hands. Her eyes were wet, not crying, but the particular brightness of someone who has been holding something in for a long time and feels it pressing against the inside. "Everything is arranged," she said. Her voice was quiet. "The program starts in 10 days. "Thank you, Mrs. Hargrove." She paused. "One favor. If Nathan asks where I've gone, please tell him you don't know. I'd like to leave without a scene." She looked stricken. "You haven't told him?" She thought about what she would say. She thought about the truth, the whole of it, the contract, the clause, the Florence door closed in year 2, the 999 times in the hospital, the meteor shower, the second blanket. She thought about whether any of it was worth saying. "Leave what?" She turned. Nathan stood 3 feet away. He had heard enough. Catherine said something quiet, she didn't catch the words, and moved away through the crowd. The piano played on. They found a library off the main hall, floor-to-ceiling shelves, 2 armchairs, the sound of the party muffled to a low hum. Nathan sat. Clara remained standing. "There are two things I want you to know," she said. "I'm not saying them to hurt you. I'm saying them because you deserve the truth, and so do I." She told him about the contract, the thank you note, the afternoon in his mother's sitting room, the 5-year agreement, the debt that drove the performance. She told him about the staged meeting, and what paragraph 7 said, and the phone call in year 4 when she learned the Florence door had been closed 2 years prior on Hargrove Foundation letterhead, without her knowledge. She told him about Vermont, the 6 months of research, the 2 chairs, the second blanket still on the seat when she left in the morning. She told him about the hospital, 3 days, no sleep, 999 times. She told him about the 30 gifts in the study corner. She told him she knew he had found the folder. She could name the week, the precise week, when something in him became deliberate. Nathan had gone completely still. His hands were folded in his lap. He was looking at a point between them, as if trying to hold on to something that was dissolving. "I'm not angry," she said. Her voice was as steady as she could make it. Not cold, steady. The voice of a woman who has made a decision and is following through on it. "I don't hate you. I need you to understand what actually happened between us clearly, so we can both actually move on. I was never free to love you. I came because I owed a debt. I stayed because I gave my word. When I jumped into that harbor, that wasn't romance. That was my job." She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. "You deserved someone who chose you freely. I deserve the chance to find out who I actually am." She looked at him once more. "Iris is here. You get what you always wanted. So do I." "Clara," his voice broke on her name. "You don't have to say anything," she said, gently, not coldly. The gentleness of someone who has set something down and feels the relief of it. "I genuinely hope you're happy. I mean that." She walked out of the library, down the hallway, through the front door. The October night was cold and clean. The jasmine in the garden had opened along the wall, the same variety that grew outside the kitchen window of the villa, the same flowers she had looked at every time she needed to remember why she was still there. She stood on the front steps for exactly 1 full breath. Then she walked to her car and drove home through the dark, to spend one last night in the house before the morning flight. She did not look back once. The apartment near the Arno was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been standing since 1782. The walls were plaster, the floor was worn stone, and the north-facing windows admitted a quality of light that painters have been traveling to Florence for 500 years to find. Cool even, without the flatness of cloud or the harshness of direct sun, the light that tells you the truth. She arrived with 1 bag, her sketchbooks, and a set of brushes she bought at a shop on the Via dei Servi the morning after she landed. She enrolled in the program. She attended every session. She ate at small restaurants alone, and took long walks along the river in the evenings and slept, for the first time in 5 years, without listening for any sound from the other side of the house. She slept well. She slept deeply. She woke up on the 3rd morning, stood at the window above the Arno, and felt something behind her sternum unclip itself, a small, quiet release, like a breath she had been holding so long she had forgotten it was held. She did not plan the paintings as a series. The first one came on its own, the way the real work always does, not summoned but arrived. She was standing at her easel one evening, looking at a blank canvas, and what appeared in her mind was not a Tuscan landscape or a figure study. It was a mountain lookout in Vermont, 2 folding chairs, a folded blanket on one of them. The sky above them full of Perseids, blazing white against absolute black. She began to paint. She worked through the night. When she stepped back 7 in the morning, the painting was finished. She had not been certain it would be. She stood in front of it until the early light shifted, the first hour of morning moving quietly across the plaster wall behind the canvas. The empty chair was the center of it. Everything else, the mountains, the sky, the fire of the meteors, existed to surround that empty chair. The blanket on its seat was the most carefully rendered thing in the piece. You could see that someone had spread it there with care. You could see that no one had used it. The second painting came 2 days later, the third 2 days after that. She stopped trying to understand it and simply let them arrive. By March, she had 10 paintings. She called the series 5 years. The paintings. The empty chair, the meteor shower lookout, Vermont, 2 chairs, 1 blanket. 30 gifts unopened. The study corner, brown paper packages, dust on the ribbon. The burned hand, a bandaged left hand, an empty exam room, a folding chair by the wall. 999. A hospital corridor at night, a bedside chair, 1 figure. Slippers by the door, the ritual of placement, 2 dark gray slippers, turned outward, at the base of a door. He signed without looking, a pen, a page, a hand that does not look down. The ring, an open velvet box, 2 hands, 1 passing it across. The contract, handwriting on cream stationery, partially legible, the edges dissolving into white. The study corner, 30 wrapped boxes, the dust on the ribbon, the quiet of things no one opened. The last morning, a breakfast table set for 1. A gallery in Florence saw them in April and asked for a show. The show opened in June. A New York gallery contacted her the following week. A curator had flown from Manhattan to see the Florence show in person. A collector who had been following the coverage since May had already reached out. By the time the New York opening was announced, 42 institutions had received press materials. 5 years opened on 57th Street in Manhattan on a Thursday evening in November. The rooms were full. The Times reviewed it that Sunday. The most intimate portrait of invisible devotion in recent memory. A record of things done in silence, offered without return, and finally made visible. The empty chair sold to the Museum of Modern Art on the 3rd day of the show for $2,400,000. The Hargrove name appeared nowhere in any press material. There was no caption that said Greenwich or Old Money or any name anyone would recognize. But in the social world where everyone knew everyone, the details were unmistakable. The slippers, the unopened gifts, the handwriting on the contract, the burned hand in the empty exam room. The whispers started quietly. Then they grew. 3 weeks after the opening, on a Thursday afternoon when the gallery was nearly empty, Nathan Hargrove walked in alone. No Iris, no Lydia, no assistant. A dark coat, the collar up, not the CO, not the here. Just a man who had taken the train from Greenwich and walked 4 blocks in the November cold. He moved through the rooms without stopping at the information desk. He already knew what he was looking for. He stood in front of 30 gifts, unopened for a long time. He recognized the ribbon, the specific kind she had always used, brown paper, cream ribbon. He counted the packages in the painting. 30. He moved to 999. The hospital corridor in cool gray blue. The bedside chair, 1 figure in it, small and motionless, a person reduced to the act of waiting. He put his hand over his mouth. He stood in front of the contract. Fragments of his mother's handwriting, partially legible, the edges of the paper dissolving into white, as if the painting were trying to let something go. Then he turned a corner and saw the empty chair. 2 chairs on a mountain at night, 1 person, a blanket folded neatly on the empty seat. Above them, the Perseids, dozens of them, blazing white against impossible black, cold and silent, and impossible to look away from. He stood in front of it for 20 minutes. He read the small card on the wall. The empty chair, August, Vermont, the Persides. He was still standing there when he heard voices from across the room. He turned. Clara was there, standing with a small group, a curator, 2 collectors, a journalist. She was talking. She looked well. She looked light in a way he had never once seen her look in 5 years of marriage. Like a woman who had set down something very heavy and was still surprised, months later, at how good her hands felt. She turned by chance and saw him. A beat of silence. She raised her glass, a small, unhurried acknowledgement, not warm, not cold, simply honest. I see you. I know you came. That is enough. Then she turned back to her conversation. He stayed another hour. He read every card on every wall. When he finally left, it was early evening and the New York streets were loud and indifferent around him. He stood on the sidewalk outside the gallery for a long moment, his hands in his pockets. She had not made these paintings to destroy him. She had not made them to expose his family or to punish anyone. She had made them because they were true. Because she had lived all of it, and it had been real, and the world had never seen it. Now it did. Martha came to Florence in January. She arrived on a Tuesday, direct from Hartford, wearing the same gray wool coat she had worn every winter for 20 years and carrying a tin of the oatmeal cookies she had baked every Christmas since Clara was 8 years old and could be trusted not to drop them. She met her at the station. Martha looked at her for a long moment, the way she had always looked at her, since she was 8 years old, drawing horses on the backs of paper bags, and then she put her arms around her and held on. "You look like yourself," she said. "You look exactly like yourself." Clara understood what she meant. She took her to the studio the following morning. The room carried the smell of the building, old stone and linen canvas, and the faint cold plaster smell of walls that had held many kinds of work before hers. Through the window came a thin current of Florentine winter air, and underneath everything, just detectable, the river. The north light came in clean and even. Her easel stood in the center of the room. The painting she was working on, a landscape, Tuscan hills in February, the pale green of the valley before the warmth comes, was nearly finished. Martha stood in the middle of the room and looked at everything, the paintings on the walls, the ones that hadn't traveled, the organized brushes, the afternoon light moving across the stone floor, the sketchbooks stacked on the windowsill, every page full. She cried, not loudly, the quiet kind, the kind you do when something you have hoped for a very long time has finally, simply happened. "Clara," she said, "this is it, isn't it? This is where you were always supposed to be." She held Martha's hands. They were warm, the way they had always been warm, the way they had been warm on the night she told an 8-year-old girl that the world was large and she was going to be fine. "Yes," she said, "I think it is." The voicemail arrived in March, Connecticut area code, forwarded to her Italian number, just past noon. She was at the window above the river when her phone buzzed. She picked it up and listened. His voice was quiet, small in the way that voices go small when they are saying something true that costs them. "Hi, Clara. It's Nathan. I don't expect you to call back. I talked to my mother. I understood everything I did after I found that folder, everything before it too. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, not because I need you to forgive me. Just because you deserve to hear it from me directly." A pause. "I came to the gallery. I stood in front of everyone. I saw you." Another pause. "I hope Florence is everything you wanted it to be." The message ended. She stood at the window for a moment. Outside, the Arno moved south, the way it always had, the way it would when she was gone. The morning light sat on the water in long, flat bands. A boat passed under the nearest bridge, slow and deliberate. She set the phone face down on the sill. She picked up her brush. The hills on the canvas were waiting. The light was exactly right. She had 5 years to make up for, and a studio with good north windows, and all the time in the world to begin. She began. I used to believe that gratitude was the safest thing I had, that honoring what you owe protects you. What I know now is that people who want to use you will always find a way to dress a cage as a gift. The only debt worth paying is the one you owe yourself, to become, finally, the person you were before you let someone else's emergency become your entire life. 2 betrayals, 5 years, 10 paintings, 1 woman finally completely, irreversibly home.